All right. I hit record at the exact right time once again. And welcome everyone to another discussion of Rings of Power. In this case, my good friend, a nemesis, Dr. AP Canavan, and I will be discussing episode 7, The Eye. So,
This is a curious thing.
yeah,
Because you became my nemesis, does that automatically make me your nemesis? Is,
I'm
is, nem-
afraid it does work that way, I
is,
believe.
is neminosity not like a one-way thing?
It's reciprocal. It's a two-way street, I'm afraid. Yeah. So you are stuck being the nemesis of Dr. Fantasy.
But but I'm not a nemesis, I'm a hero.
In your perception of things, perhaps, which is true of all evil geniuses.
Oh, so character subjective perception is an important part of this.
It could be.
Oh, now we're in my field of let's talk
Oh,
about narrative.
we are very much in your wheelhouse now, which means I should be careful. You don't want to be in the wheelhouse of an evil, nefarious genius. So yeah. But anyway, we are here to discuss The Eye, episode 7. And I'm sure that you have some thoughts on this episode. And seeing as how I am the host and you are the guest, you get to go first. So, AP, what did you make of episode 7, The Eye, and any just general assessment? Or why is it called The Eye, by the way? Do you want to address that?
Well, we haven't really discussed a lot of how the titles quite often have meaning for the episode. And it's something we generally do when we're discussing literatures. If there's an epigraph or a title or something like that, we tie it into themes. And while like the obvious thing here is like the eye of Sauron, that's the big
Yeah.
Tolkienian link.
Yeah.
Actually, for me, the fact that this is called the eye had a lot to do with seeing, perception.
Mm.
Because in this we have now obviously a very blatant example is Muriel being blinded.
Yes.
She loses the use of her eyes. But in that, if we look at the transition of Muriel as somewhat representative of the Numenorians,
Mm-hmm.
the Numenorians have had their eyes opened to the realities of war.
Yeah.
If we think back, and I think was it episode 5 where we had Valandil and Ontimo in the bar, and oh, we're gonna go out and we're gonna show those dirty orcs a what for, and it was
Yeah.
evoking that sense of the World War I mentality of the young man full of false bravado, thinking about war as a great and glorious combat. That
Mm.
it was this contest, and now their eyes have been opened to the reality of war. Not only did Ontimo perish, but all the Numenorians have suffered loss. They've suffered tragedy. They've seen the horrific reality of war. And this is stunning to them. That this myth about what war is, the great and glorious battle, and oh, we are going to ride in as heroes and be victorious, this um, fantastic myth that we often, even today, still tell ourselves about what war and conflict are,
Yeah. Yeah.
has been rudely and drastically reshaped. Their eyes have been opened to the truth of it, the horror of it, the cost of it, the wounds, the maiming, the death, the loss, all of it. That this is truly terrible and tragic and horrific.
Mm-hmm.
And Muriel, faced with the cost, they could have gone, you know what, we're backing away. But now she truly sees the threat on Middle Earth. She
Right.
sees this, and there's a great line when we discover that she's blinded, when she says, "Oh, I see," and Elendil, and she means I see as in I understand, and Ellen goes,
Mm-hmm.
"Do you?" And of course, that's no. She sees as in understands, but she is now blind. So there's a lot of playfulness on eyes, seeing, and perception. And it
Yes.
and it ties into the theme of darkness and light. The idea that um, being blinded, being in the dark, and that being associated with darkness, of not seeing the truth. But now Muriel, even blinded in the dark, is seeing truer. And it ties into the prophecy that her father had. In uh, in the East, there is only darkness.
Mm-hmm.
So not only is it literally true in terms of the sky turning dark because of the volcanic ash, but Muriel being blinded and now sitting in darkness, that's what she found. She found darkness, the darkness of the realities of war that I just mentioned. But there's also the light, the bringing together of Numenor. But one of the things that has been running through from the beginning is it true light, the light of the stars that um, Finrod was telling Galadriel about at the beginning? Or is
Mm.
it the reflection of the light, a false light, that is going to lead them down into darkness? Because when we think of Muriel's oath, she is making the oath of revenge, of vengeance, of punishment on the orcs. Very similar to what we saw with Galadriel at the beginning, and where Galadriel is trying to move away from that darkness and false light.
Yeah.
We now see Numenor potentially taking that trajectory, going down into the darkness.
Very interesting.
And
Yeah.
and I think this is neatly contrasted with what we see with Galadriel. Galadriel in episode 5 had beginning to get those cracks in her armor. Episode 6, we saw again those moments where she was with Halbrand trying to find a reason to fight for something instead of to fight against something. But it's an uneasy transition because it is very hard to change your personality on a dime. And when she's confronted with Adar represents everything that she hates, and we see that darkness come to the fore.
Yeah.
And here she's trying to look after Theo. Oh, Theo, the little scamp. But in trying to talk to Theo, where Theo is asking, how do I not take on the burden of this? Because it's dragging, basically, they're talking about taking on the responsibility for these things happening. And she says, like, don't take on this responsibility. It will have a cost for it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, can you remember what their line was?
No, not off the top of my head, but I do know what you're talking about.
Um,
And the fact that they paired Galadriel with Theo was, I thought, a good choice for this episode post the destruction of the Southlands and having them have to make their way back to the encampment of the Númenóreans and find solace in each other. And you have this human boy living with this terrible guilt of having handed over the key, the sword hilt, and that was used to essentially create Mordor. You have that boy dealing with that guilt and in this world that has been transformed, his world, his home, along with Galadriel, and they're really not just helping each other, but they're teaching each other. They're learning from each other in ways where that was nice. I like those moments with the two of them. I thought that was an important thing to present here, that you have human and elf, and then there's such a contrast between the two, this boy and this elf who's been around for thousands of years with all this experience, and yet they're really in this symbiotic relationship, teaching and helping one another. And she gives him the sword as a kind of a, there's a message behind that, of course, and she calls him a soldier, I think, warrior, one or the other, and
well,
realizes,
he says, like, am I a soldier now? And she gives him the sword, which there's a big symbolic thing about that I want to talk about. But
yeah,
she gives him the sword and basically says, we this is the start of being a soldier, essentially.
right. Yeah.
But in that exchange, sorry, I had made a note, for one of the few times I've ever made notes. And it's she said, do not take this burden upon your shoulders. You may find it hard to put down again.
Uh-huh.
And Theo asks, how am I to let it go? And there's this really long pause as Galadriel searches for the answer. And she gives, it's not an empty platitude, but she reaches for, there are powers other than darkness. Obviously, the Valar and Iluvatar. But she ultimately ends with, I cannot yet see. Like how are we to reframe this? How is this tying into the great plan? How is this going to work out?
He
And she
asks,
says, I
"How is the destruction of my home some kind of, greater plan?" Like, and that's when she responds with that line. Yeah,
I cannot yet see. So again, tying it back into to seeing, and this is something I think we're all familiar with.
yeah,
Of when we've been told, oh, there's there is a greater good, things will work out, and when you're surrounded by the devastation that is so personal, you don't have the ability to take a step back and go, well, in the grand scheme of things, this is going to all work out fine. You go, no, like you can't see it. You're too close to it. It
hmm
it's too personal. The cost is too high, and I think that's a very relatable moment in it of these two warring oppositions that we have in our own lives of the immediate effects can be devastating. And then if we think back to something that was devastating 30 years ago, yes, it was still devastating. It is still devastating. But ultimately it led to where we are now. And that cannot be changed. And where we are now can, because that thing was so impactful,
right.
we've been shaped by that. That's so all of the good that is in our lives, those earlier moments of darkness or of pain or tragedy have been part of that journey. So do we say that, oh well, if we remove those, the journey would still be the same? And the difficulty in trying to rationalize those two positions or integrate those two positions can be very, very difficult for us because we lack the perspective.
It's a
Um,
perspective that you have to arrive at through the growth of wisdom, and experience. Yeah, which Theo, of course, being a young kid, lacks at this point, right?
Well, not only does he lack wisdom, he also lacks bloody common sense. Trying to draw the sword, like we're hiding from this band of orcs. And I thought that scene was a wonderful homage to the scene in Fellowship of the Ring
Uh-huh. When they're hiding from the Nazgul. Yeah.
when they hide from the Nazgul. And it's a
Frodo
scene
goes
that
for
is
the
so,
ring. Frodo goes for the ring. Yeah.
but it's a scene that is so iconic that not only did Bakshi adapt that scene, but so did Peter Jackson and did it in a very similar way to Bakshi's animation. That
Yeah.
scene is so pivotal. It's one of those things of knowing the danger is there and not having the false bravado to go, oh, I would just fight it. Then you would lose.
Right.
And Galadriel, we get the sense. Remember how she was in episode 1, climbing up that cliff face, constantly leaving people behind, throwing herself in with no thought of who was with her. She didn't care about the people under her command. She was so driven,
Right.
so focused, so blinded to other people. And in this moment, she is more worried about keeping Theo safe and getting Theo back to the camp
Yeah.
than she is about exacting her revenge.
Yeah.
And so, without drawing attention to the fact, without putting a big red arrow and going, look how Galadriel has changed, they keep showing us that she is evolving. And it
Like,
is slow,
yeah.
it is gradual. You can't just flip a switch. It's not like Paul on the road to Damascus.
Well, there was also a nice nod to an earlier episode when she first arrives in Numenor, and she does a little like head bow, and then Muriel says, "We don't bow in Numenor," and they did a nice little echo of that in this episode where she kneels not out of some awe or anything, out of empathy. Galadriel has a moment of deep empathy and sorrow for Muriel, seeing her blinded, and that kneeling in that moment came from a very different place from where she was earlier in the season, where there was it was an encounter of egos. Here, it was much more a connection between these two women, one an elf, one a human, and Galadriel has obviously evolved into this place where she does reach out, where she feels the sorrow of Muriel's situation and says, "I'm so sorry I brought you here." And then Muriel responds with this determination, which I like what they did with her character in this episode a lot, actually.
And that moment of Galadriel not only recognizing what Muriel has given, recognizing Muriel's suffering, recognizing that Muriel is now on the path that Galadriel was on, but it's also a moment of humility.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think Galadriel has been so prideful. That initial contest between Miriel and Galadriel, it was
Hmm.
Halbrand had said, Nil. And she had gone to Nil because whatever.
Right.
But now no one is telling her to do it. And she recognizes Miriel as an equal.
Yes.
She never thought of the humans as equals.
Right. Right.
It didn't occur to her because she was Galadriel, she was an elf, and they were merely human. And now she is seeing Theo as someone worth protecting. She is seeing Halbrand as a friend. She is seeing Miriel as an equal.
Yes.
All of these have chipped away and eroded her pride, her arrogance. And she is learning humility and wisdom. And
Yeah.
when we think of who Galadriel becomes, these are the stepping stones to get there. And like this is sometimes I think it's strange when people go, oh, but she should just be this, as if characters should be static. This is an arc, this is a progression, this is Galadriel learning. And we
Mhm.
don't need it signposted. We don't need big red arrows pointing, going, and now, and someone explaining to us, look, she is now being humble.
Yeah. Yep.
And so I think this was really, really important in terms of Galadriel's arc because she is now struggling with
Yeah.
her anger against Adar, what she had said, that horrendous threat that she made against him
Right.
about the orcs. And then when Theo was asking about it, and when she had said that she's killed many orcs, and he went, good. And he went, don't call or bad acts good, or don't
Right.
use good to describe them because that allows evil into us. And it's easier to see the flaws in other people than it is ourselves. Self
Yeah.
reflection is incredibly difficult.
Well, she has the great line about when you're in battle, there are two battles. There's the exterior one, and then there's the interior one, and what you allow yourself to become in response to your enemy. And so that, yeah, definite development here. Really good stuff. Yeah.
And so I just liked how Galadriel now in the last couple of episodes is really transitioning. It's visible
Yeah.
how her character is changing.
Yeah.
And it for me, obviously this is what I want because I want Galadriel to end up being the Galadriel I know from the Lord of the Rings books.
The Kate
But
Blanchett Galadriel. Yeah.
no, not Kate Blanchett Galadriel.
Although
Galadriel from the
I do like
books.
Kate Blanchett Galadriel too. But
Yeah,
yeah.
she did an amazing job, but
Yeah.
I mean the Galadriel from the books, not the
Uh-huh, that
film.
one. Yes, yes. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. No,
but
no, that's well said. Yeah, and I agree. Yeah. Though I will say one thing about this particular thread while we're on it before we move on to the Harfoots, and of course, my favorite thread from the show was Elrond and Durin and what's going on there because of the tension that was in that particular thread. But the one I will have a little just complaint about, and it's probably more of a yeah. Let's get spicy. It's more of a television complaint, really, than a screen storytelling complaint, I guess. And this is the book reader in me too, grumbling about the influence of screen storytelling on book storytelling. And there are several examples. I'm going to focus on what I thought was the worst one in this episode. And it's a matter of transitions, I think, and editing more than anything else. It's so common in television. So it's not really a particular complaint about Rings of Power, but here I go. The moment when she finds out Halbrand is on his deathbed and goes and sees him. And I love that. That itself is great. There's the friendship between them is palpable there. And her genuine, I mean, she puts on a brave face, but you can tell she does a great job acting in that moment where you feel the worry and you see him. He looks pale. I mean, he looks like he's paler than you there. So so I mean, he looks like he's about to kick the bucket. He's got this festering wound. They even say it's infected and everything, and he's on his deathbed. I mean, he's about to go, and she says the line, "He needs Elvish healing." And so, okay, yes, I'm assuming that the Elvish healing takes place. It doesn't happen on screen. But the next thing you know, they're emerging from the tent and he's kind of walking on and gallops away on a horse. How did he heal
Right.
that fast? Is
He
what I'm.
didn't heal. Because I was looking at this. First of all, that seems very evocative of what happened to Frodo in Fellowship.
Yeah.
But when he comes out, he's not striding. He is
Yeah, but he
walking.
gallops away on a
No,
horse.
but
And have you ever been on galloping on a horse? That takes a
yes,
lot. That's going to jar your
yeah.
insides.
But
So
if you listen, Bronwyn says we were going to try and heal him on the way. He's lying there resting because he's in pain,
yeah,
and he has a bad wound that they have bound,
it's infected.
and it's infected. The infection's going to kill him, not the wound.
Uh,
But Bronwyn says that they were going to try and heal him on the way. He always could travel, but it
yeah.
was going to be difficult and painful because they can't treat the infection.
But why I would assume that traveling doesn't mean galloping on a horse, right? Like they'd have him laid out in
And
the back of a cart or something, you know?
and and like the number of times Frodo is at death's door when he gets stabbed with the Morgul knife, and
Yeah,
yet gets on the back of Glorfindel's horse. Sorry,
right.
for those of you who just watched the films, Arwen's horse,
Yeah,
where he's thrown over it.
right,
But
right,
he
right.
gets on the back of Glorfindel's horse and gallops off, even though he is dying and turning into a wraith.
Yeah.
He does all of that, and everyone goes, "Oh, he's so brave, and he's clamping down on the pain." And now we have, oh, Halbrand does it. Oh well, like he couldn't have done that. Yeah, why is he not tougher than Frodo?
Well, I don't think it's particularly realistic, in quotes there, but and that's why I said it's a general issue I
And
have with screen storytelling, where it's just a little bit abrupt for me. Where if they had maybe, if they had shown something glowy happening when she heals him or
no, she
something, or
because I don't think Galadriel is. If they'd shown her right, get out of bed, and he's oh, this is going to be painful. If they'd shown that, and then him getting
yes,
on the horse,
that would have
and then
been better if they instead had, but they had him looking like he was about to croak, right? So
well, let's just peel lying in bed. Like
maybe your idea of pale is a little bit skewed here.
but well, a lot of people that I know are that pale. I didn't see it as looking particularly sickly at death's door, but that's just me. Um,
Oh no.
I agree. I mean, it is one of those things that sometimes in visual storytelling we don't have that extra one or two lines that we would get in exposition in a novel
Right,
that would
right.
would detail these things a little bit more clearly.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not completely unbelievable because again, they stress that it's the infection they can't treat, not the wound itself.
If
That
they
the
had
infection
given
is
it,
killing him.
if somehow signified that a few days had passed, or if they had made him less almost dead, like, okay, then
Yeah,
okay. But
yeah.
it's a
I mean,
niggle. It's a little
yeah,
thing.
I take your point. I understand it. It's
Yeah.
just it's one of those ones that doesn't really bother me because as you point out, it happens all the time
It
in
happens
film and
all the
television.
time on screens. So,
But I'll tell
but
you I'll tell you where there is a really good transition.
okay.
When Elendil is asking about um the fate of Isildur, he goes, "Where is my son?"
Oh, that's really good. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and then it transitions to Theo and Galadriel, and
Mm,
Theo says, "They are dead, aren't they?" And frames it as a question. So the transition, "Where is my son?" And then the next line of dialogue is, "They are dead." So there's a really nice transition of Isildur or Elendil asking the question,
yeah.
then the inference being they are dead. So Isildur is dead, even though no one saw him die. They saw the building collapse and just assumed. We all know what happens
We
when you
all
assume
know
things.
Isildur's okay, spoiler, but we all know anybody who's read or even seen the Peter Jackson films, you know that Isildur is not dead,
But
right?
anyone who knows anything about media literacy also now knows this, even if you knew nothing
Yeah.
about Lord of the Rings, because where's my son? They are dead, aren't they? Asked as a question about Arondir and his mother. And what do we know by the end? Arondir and his mother are alive. So
Wait.
Theo,
Who and his mother?
Theo's mother.
Yeah. Oh, yes, 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 of course. Yeah. He
Theo
finds him.
asks,
Yeah.
"Are they? They are
Yeah,
dead,
yeah, yeah, of
aren't they?"
course.
Asks the question
Yeah.
because he assumes that they are. Galadriel basically is kind of guessing that they are, but she reassures him, "What cannot be known hollows the mind. Fill it not with guesswork."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Warning you, just because you think something, you don't know this yet, so don't worry about it.
And that's a
When you
lovely scene too, by the way, when he's reunited with his mother and with Arondir in the sick tent there.
Yeah.
That's a really nice scene. Yeah.
So one of the takeaways from this is a character assumes other characters are dead.
Yeah.
The episode goes out of its way to prove to you this was an assumption that has been proven wrong. With Isildur, they assume he is dead. The horse knows
The
that
horse
he is
knows.
alive
The horse
and
is trying to
leaves.
tell them we need to go back and get him.
Obviously, they never watched any of those shows with like Flipper or
The Black Stallion.
oh no, what was the one about the dog? Lassie.
Which one? Yeah, okay,
You know,
Lassie.
oh, what is that? Timmy's trapped down the well
Yeah.
again. Um, but the
But
animal
Beric
knows,
knows. Beric knows. Yes.
and so we have all of this evidence that yes, Isildur is alive, and this is where audiences know more than the characters. But if
Right.
the character just went, "Oh well, clearly he's alive," you'd go, "That's not psychologically real." That would be the characters going, "Well, hang on, I've read the book." It's like that scene in Spaceballs where they go, "Hang on, what's going to happen next? Let's check the script," and they flip through the script on screen to find out where characters characters have knowledge fixed in place. And like another really good example of this is Galadriel talking about Celeborn, or sorry,
Celeborn.
Celeborn.
Yeah. Yeah.
I always, I don't know why I do that.
Just think Celt. Hard C, Celt, Celeborn. Yeah.
Thank you for explaining what a hard C was. Like I didn't know.
We'll get you straight. Don't worry.
But Galadriel remembers him going off to war, and then she never saw him again.
And we know.
Yet. And that's the thing. He went off to war. She doesn't know where he is. But she was on her mission because, again, single-minded pursuit of, and also she hasn't been thinking about it. She hasn't been, what cannot be known hollows the mind, fill it not with guesswork. She is deliberately not thinking about where Celeborn is.
Yeah. That was an interesting reveal in this because I had been assuming all along that she hadn't met him yet, that they weren't married yet. And so that was okay. Well, but I did pick up that we're meant to understand Celeborn isn't dead. He's got to show up later on. They got to have their daughter who marries Elrond, et cetera, et cetera. So,
so I think this was great because he can show up and it'll be Galadriel. You know when you were out gallivanting all around everywhere, I was actually trapped in a dungeon, or
I'm wondering where he's been. It would be kind of interesting if he had been, and this is not in Tolkien writing anywhere, I don't think, but what if he was somehow captured and tortured like some of the old ancient elves were that were turned into orcs or something like that? And that would give her a totally new insight into people like Adar and so forth. So anyway, I wonder what they're going to do with that. Yeah.
So I think that's in it. It's not that the writers don't know that Celeborn exists.
Oh, they know.
They are obviously very well aware of it.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see how they work him back into the story. Because we know Celeborn is very important for the history of Middle Earth, for the history of Arda.
Yeah.
Even if he's
not that important, but
his children are important.
Yeah. I mean, he's got to do that. Other than that, he's just got to stand next to Galadriel and look elvish.
So, the stuff with Galadriel, I really liked in this episode. It was consolidating elements from before. There were callbacks to what they've been developing. It was showing it in a new light. It's showing her progression.
Yeah.
The stuff with the Numenorians, very, very reminiscent of that experience and what we see about World War One and the horrors of going into war like this, that they have been disabused of their notions about great and glorious battle. And we see the consolidation of the beginnings of this alliance, the last alliance of elf and men, which is, really important for this story.
Absolutely.
And we can see the beginnings of that. But it's interesting that Elendil, who has been a supporter of Galadriel's, a supporter of the elves,
We lost
now
his son.
refers to
Yeah.
now refers to her as the elf.
Yeah.
I should have left her in the sea. And his bitterness, this is going to test the faith of the faithful,
Of the elf friend.
of the elf friend.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a nice dramatic tension point. Because if he was always, oh yeah, well, I love the elves and the elves are great and I'll just follow the elves, it becomes very one dimensional, or at best two dimensional. But now there's going to be a depth to it. And bringing him back around is going to give his character deeper resonance and motivation and deepen the experience and be more interesting to watch than, oh yeah, but Elendil's always been an elf friend.
Yeah.
It makes it interesting. So I like that as a development, as a dramatic tension being inserted.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Well, who do you want to talk about next? We have the Harfoots and we also have the Elrond and Durin. Let's finish with Elrond and Durin, I think. And
Well, okay. Well, I was about to say, because that the Harfoot storyline is not my favorite, but also in this episode, there's one line of dialogue I really object to, and one snippet of a scene I horrendously objected. They're both actually in the Khazad-dûm section.
Oh, okay.
But we can end on those, and let's talk about the hobbits.
Okay, we'll talk about the hobbits / Harfoots for a bit, and the stranger, and the development there with the priestesses who show up and burn all the Harfoots' carts and carriages and belongings.
The cult of Eminem.
Yeah, the cult of Eminem. Yes.
Will the real Slim Sauron please stand up?
Oh dear. Yeah. So yeah, what are
let's
your
talk
thoughts on the Harfoots and the stranger and the cult of Eminem?
Again, going back to the idea of the eye, of seeing the Harfoots finally seeing not only the danger of the stranger, because the rest of the Harfoots were very well aware of the danger of the stranger.
Yeah.
Stranger danger. We were told about that as kids.
Yep.
And Nori was defending him. In the last episode that we had Nori sort of run away, realizing again, she suddenly saw the peril associated with or with the stranger. But now their eyes have been opened to the fact that yes, power is dangerous, but it can be used for good, and they have misjudged what the meteor man was trying to do.
Right.
And they overreacted. And
well,
they
I don't
showed
think he
that they
even
were
understood, right? I mean, I think he even believed that he failed in that moment when he almost killed Nori and her younger sister and all of that.
Not his fault. What was the kid called? See, bloody children.
Nelly or something, or I forget. But yeah, Nelly goes forward when why? Yeah.
This is, have you ever been around kids when there are fireworks and you go, don't touch, don't touch,
immediately.
Don't touch that.
Right.
They have the common sense of I was about to say a small child. Yeah.
It was like me when I was 2 and I wanted to put my finger in the electric socket. And my mother
so that's what happened to you.
Yeah, that explains a lot, right? And my mother said, don't do that. And I was like, so, and that's what happens, right?
So they realize, those that have been very, very suspicious of him have their eyes open to the fact that yes, they have misjudged him. And even Malva, who has been so mean.
Yes, we had a nice Malva moment. Yeah.
Admits that she was wrong. We have a lot of this, the self-realization of characters in this episode where they realize that they have been wrong. And we see other characters like Elendil who are making mistakes that we know are wrong. Right. And so there's a really nice juxtaposition of characters leaping to conclusions and being proven false and realizing it, and other characters still making those leaps, because that's very reflective of of what happens.
Yeah.
People do this all the time. And
Yeah.
so that was a really interesting moment in that. I thought that was well done,
I
even if
like
they're
I like that they humanized Malva a little bit. She went from being a stereotype to being actually, oh, that's good. I like that. That was a nice little, come on now.
um,
It was good.
and, and even the development of Sadok giving Sir Lenny Henry a bit more to do with the role,
Yeah.
and that is launching in a very interesting direction. There is an aspect of one of the I think is it in Untold Tales or the Unfinished Tales where talks about the Blue Wizards and one of them raised a cult of magic
Oh,
users.
you and your blue wizards again.
And if this cult, because they use evocation to use a D&D term,
Yeah.
she sends out a fireball,
Uh-huh.
and Tolkien was quite careful with the vast majority of how magic is used in the Legendarium. That these
Yes.
explicit forms of magic, like that, of casting a fireball spell, had to be very carefully maintained because that type of magic was more of the darkness. It was good magic was protection and um, preserving and healing. Those were all good forms of magic. Destruction, so things like fireballs, was more on the dodgy side of things, more
Mhm.
associated with evil. And so we have this clear destruction signaling that these people are mean and evil because they
Yeah.
did this to the Harfoots. But also they're pursuing the stranger. So could they be trying to ally with him, or are they pursuing him to try and
You mean the priestesses? Yeah.
destroy him?
They don't seem that nice to me.
And
I mean, they definitely they have their pyromantic tendencies there, and setting all the Harfoot stuff on fire doesn't seem like a nice people move to me.
it certainly doesn't endear them to us. But
Yeah,
the point that I was trying to get to about the Blue Wizards was
yeah, yeah.
there is this element where one of them uh, created a cult of magic users.
Uh-huh.
And yet there's this whole story that the Blue Wizards, what they did in those lands, reduced the armies that Sauron could draw on.
Uh-huh.
So if this is going to tie into that, this could be related to why Sauron doesn't have as large an army as he ends up having. That this
Oh.
is about that element of the story, which, you know, that's entirely supposition on my part. We need to see where it's going to go.
Yeah.
Um,
You want
but
those blue wizards so badly.
I do. I
I'll tell you one element of the Harfoot storyline that I really liked, and it's an echo of Lord of the Rings, where you have a very unhobbit-like decision made on the part of first Bilbo when he leaves the Shire on his adventure, and it gets much more serious with Frodo and his quest to deal with the ring. And it's this moment where the Harfoots do something uncharacteristic of themselves, where they decide at the end to go against their ways, their norms, and to, instead of do the safe, cozy thing of just hiding and staying away from it, they decide, no, we need to go help the stranger because he is being pursued by these hostile people, and it's our duty to go and warn him. And so that's a very courageous decision that they take. And I love that Malva has her little moment in contributing to it, and that Sadok Burrows goes along. But of course, Nori is the one who initiates it because that's who she is. We've seen that she's a very venturesome Harfoot. So I like that. I like that echo of here's the little people taking on a responsibility, going outside their comfort zone to do something altruistic and noble. So that was nice.
and think of how that ties into Galadriel and Halbrand's conversation in the last episode, where they were basically talking about how fighting to protect someone, fighting to for something was
Yes.
such a positive thing. Whereas we can contrast it then with Galadriel's initial, I'm going to punish. That was her initial vow. And
Yeah.
now Miriel's vow, her oath, which, and we know oaths and vows are far more portentous and powerful in Arda than they are in our world.
Yeah.
But again, Miriel has taken a very dark oath. But what the hobbits are proposing, what the Harfoots are proposing, is very positive. It's we're going to go and help.
Yeah.
And again, it's that nice juxtaposition of these two different things. We're going to go and do this thing to help someone.
Right.
Muriel is why we're going to go and do this thing to punish someone. And I think that intentionality is actually quite important in how these things are being discussed.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So yeah, I think there's still a bit of a mystery as to exactly what these priests, they seem to be priestesses to me, at least here. Hard to say for sure, but exactly what they are, who they are. They seem to be associated in some way, shape, or form with Sauron.
And
And
the
they
Blue
are,
Wizards.
oh gosh, when you're I will actually, I will say this on camera. I will buy you a deluxe edition of the Lord of the Rings if any Blue Wizards show up in Rings of Power season 1.
To be honest, I think your money's going to be safe. But we that's the thing. We all have hopes about how someone is going to do something, how an
Right.
adaptation is going to tell a story.
We all have
What
our pet things that we want.
what
Yeah.
what things that we would like to see in it. And yeah, I admit it. I want to see the Blue Wizards. But if it turns out to be Gandalf, and it possibly can be, then I'll go, okay, like let's see. I want to see where they go with it more than anything else.
Yeah.
But in my heart of hearts, I do want a Blue Wizard.
I'll almost be happy if they turn up because just for you, just for you. So, but anything else about the Harfoots in the storyline before we move on to the final one with Elrond and Durin?
Um, not really. I like how they're setting out as a party, very similar to in Fellowship, forming a fellowship of
Yeah.
these hobbits, and it's we're not going to let you go alone.
Yeah.
And that's what Merry and Pippin and Sam decided for Frodo.
Exactly. Yeah.
And well, admittedly, they left Fatty Bulger behind, but
Poor
he
Fatty
didn't want to go.
Bulger. Yeah. Yeah.
But their friendship dictated that they would, even though this had nothing to do with them, even though they didn't really want to and they don't know what they are doing, they would take this leap. And that is such a strong Tolkienian theme of people who are not directly involved going, you know what, we will stand up and we will try to help. And that positivity, I think, is such a strong theme in Tolkien.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a very,
So,
so very
that
appropriate. Yeah.
despite the fact that it is my least favorite storyline, probably a lot of it to do with the mystery box elements of it about who is the stranger. I honestly, I hope that a lot of this stuff gets resolved so we can move on to actually having, yeah, we know who he is, and now we just want to see where the story's going. I hate the imposition of mystery and we're going to withhold this information. That that to me is one of the least satisfying forms of dramatic tension.
Uh-huh.
But I understand it's a very effective way of keeping people tuning in, people going, but I want to know, I want to find out. It keeps like we've had discussions about this how many times now?
Yeah.
Because this element is there, it hasn't been resolved. So it is still a discussion point. It is still interesting to have theories about it. I just
Yeah.
I'm much more invested in how things are developing rather than trying to guess what's going to happen.
Well,
And
in my head, the stranger is Gandalf already. I've pretty much decided that. Sorry, no Blue Wizard.
but let's talk about Elrond and Durin,
Let's do
who
it. Yeah.
I think
Let's
I
start
think
with your problems because there was a bit of dialogue that you didn't like, right?
there is a line that Durin uses, and it is a very emotional, impactful line.
Mm-hmm.
Apart from one thing, and he said when he's talking to Big Daddy Durin, he says, "My friend is drowning and reaching out a hand." And this goes back to a problem I had in one of the earlier episodes where Celebrimbor said they treat the mountain like an aged parent.
Mm-hmm.
Why is Durin reaching for a drowning metaphor?
Mm.
He's a dwarf who lives under the mountain, and yet he is reaching for a drowning metaphor instead of the natural metaphor for a dwarf. Now, don't get me wrong, the impact of the it is delivered with emotion and impact, and it's a powerful line
Yeah.
because he sees his friend is in despair and he wants to help his
Well,
friend. Like,
he's gonna die. Yeah. Yeah.
although
That's the thought.
we know the elves have a very bizarre perception of time. No one has asked, right? You say that you're going to dwindle and disappear and basically become mortal and die, and this is terrible.
Right.
In what sort of time frame? Because I'm guessing the elves going, oh yeah, it's terrible, like sometime in the next couple of 100 years. And the dwarves would go, what's the rush then?
Right.
No one has asked them this.
Yeah,
Like
the
even
elves are kind of
Elrond
like
couldn't ask.
the elves are kind of like, oh, I think I see a gray hair. I see a gray hair. Oh my God, I'm dying.
It's what laughter lines? Um, because I can't remember what TV show it was in, but there was an immortal character, and they, for one reason, it might have been in Buffy, but the next day they've been made mortal, and they go, "Oh my God, I'm dying," and everyone's like, "Really?" They go, "Yes." Well, what's wrong? It's like, I'm aging. I'm going to die sometime in the next like 20 to 60 years. And they're like, that's not dying, that's aging. And they're like, no, but it is dying because it's the first time they've ever had to confront it. And I get the sense that maybe the elves are being a wee bit dramatic the way that, elves kind of are.
Yeah.
But Durin's line, I thought it had the emotion, it had the impact. I
Uh-huh.
just wish that they hadn't gone for a sea metaphor, a water metaphor. I wish they'd gone with something to do with a cave in or something to do with stone or something tied into
Yeah.
him being a dwarf.
That would have been more appropriate for sure. Yeah. Although they do have a lake down there, I hear somewhere where, Gollum ends up hanging out. But yeah. Anyway.
Different mountain.
Yeah. Isn't it part of the whole, isn't it down there somewhere?
I know, but not in that, not in Khazad-dûm.
Oh, okay.
Gollum doesn't live in Khazad-dûm.
Yeah. Well, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. The Misty Mountains. Yeah. So
Yeah, it's in the same mountain range,
yeah,
isn't it?
but they
Yeah.
have I'm sure underwater bodies, underground bodies of water in there, right? Something.
But anyway, so yeah, Durin and Elrond and Disa. Again, Disa at the forge. How many times have we seen a close-up or a reference to the anvil and forges in
Yeah, there
every
is your
single
forge.
episode?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
there's been this really nice continuing touchstone
yeah,
of that imagery of the making of something, the crafting of something. And it's usually weapons.
yeah. And speaking of Disa, did you get? Because I love her. I think she's dynamic, fun, a very vivacious character in this. But did you get a little bit of kind of that's a little bit ambitious there at that moment at the end when she was saying, "You're going to be the king and I'm going to be the queen and we're going to rule." And it seemed like a little bit of dwarf kind of stubbornness edging into dwarf pride there when we know where that goes, because we got a big cameo there when the leaf goes down into and we get the Balrog saying, "Hi, everybody." Right. So I
Um,
just felt like Disa had a bit of I still like the character, but and then I'm not saying evil or anything like that, but there was a moment there when I thought, ooh, there's a bit of pride. There's our pride theme again, rearing its ugly head, right?
Now, obviously, being a very happily married man who has never done anything to cause my wife to look at me and go, right.
I
I
could
I
never
honestly
imagine that. Never.
I can't imagine anything like this. And I'm sure that you, as a perfectly happy married man, have never done anything where your wife has turned around and gone, right, this is how we fix this thing that you've
Never.
gotten yourself embroiled into because you're an idiot. And
Never. Never. Not
no,
once.
it would never happen.
Yeah.
Um, so I liked that moment of the leaf slowly being affected by the presence of the mithril nearby. I loved the exchanges, the emotion between Elrond and Durin when they were initially saying goodbye,
They're
but
brilliant.
then
Yeah.
the recall and it's like seeing the leaf and going, actually, look, this is being proven true,
Yeah.
and the devotion of friendship. The fact that Elrond then reveals, where Durin works out that Elrond didn't fully participate in,
Lose the contest. Yeah.
and it's the whole elf lies, and it's well, yeah, and but it's the good natured, God, the depth of their friendship that they both actors manage to convey and portray so well on screen. It is a
It's one of
joy.
the best parts of the whole series. Yeah. Yeah.
The, the casting of Elrond, Durin, and Disa has been brilliant. The
Yeah.
writing for them has been brilliant.
Yeah.
The portrayals that the actors have managed has been brilliant.
Even
Like
Durin the third, the father, he's the third, I think, right? And the son is Durin the fourth, I think. Uh, Great casting there. Yeah, good job. Yeah,
and again, he prideful, arrogant, stubborn.
yeah.
You know, the all of the stuff with Khazad-dûm has been really brilliantly evoked. Apart from, and I'm going to talk about the scene in it that I dislike.
Okay.
The leaf falls down, and yeah, it falls down a long, long way to
Yeah,
hit the Balrog.
through the
But it,
veins of Mithril and everything.
no,
Yeah.
no, through the giant chasm
Oh,
and lands on the bottom, and the Balrog wakes up. You're like, how are they going to mine anything without the Balrog going and climbing up to eat them straight away?
no, no, no. He wouldn't. He wouldn't do that. He would take his giant broom and hit the ceiling first and take. Shut up, you guys. You know.
It, I I really wish it had fought, if they were going to show that it had fallen down
Yeah.
and started singeing, and then we realized it was on a sleeping Balrog that was buried or something,
Oh.
instead of the Balrog already being awake. That that annoys me. I because I
Okay,
can't imagine how they are going to mine without killing and or getting into a fight with the Balrog straight away.
yeah, because they have a lot of Mithril to get, don't they?
But you know, part of that is potentially my failure of imagination, and part of it is making an assumption that this is the Balrog that is Durin's Bane that kills everyone in Moria. But I dislike that they have the Balrog already awake. I
Huh.
much would have preferred this to be a big vein of mithril that as soon as they extract it, it actually opens a new chasm, and that's where the Balrog is asleep.
But they were going for the visuals, I think, too. So
Yeah, and one minor thing with the visuals, the Balrog has wings. I know that
you
this
have
is
to
an
blame
argument.
Peter Jackson for that. Yeah.
Well, and Bakshi as well,
Oh, the
because
Bakshi wings were that was one of the worst.
I
With
know, but
the
when it is
Balrog and the
described,
Bakshi
the
version is
smoke, the smoke surrounding it is like wings. Look up the definition of the word simile. They aren't real wings.
yeah.
It doesn't have wings.
But
Stop.
you gotta if you haven't seen the Bakshi version of the Balrog is the most comedic element in the entire thing where it's
And a
like
lot
the
of it is,
least scary Balrog you ever meet, and it has
I
these
don't
like
know, if you saw that thing coming towards you, I reckon that Dr. Fantasy might be wishing he was wearing the brown trousers.
well, I don't know. I might die of laughter, but
But
anyway,
again, talking about seeing, um,
yes,
Disa and uh, Duran Jr.
yeah,
are almost blinded by potentially like Disa for the ambition, Duran because of wanting to help his friend, but also his ambition. This mithril is going to make Khazad-dûm great.
yeah, yeah.
Duran Sr. is blinded by his stubbornness. But at the same time, he's right. There's a reason they don't go delving that deep. There's a
He's
reason
actually
they
right. We
don't.
know that the viewers, the Tolkien fans know. Oh, actually, Daddy's got a point there.
And he talks about it in terms of delving into the darkness.
Yeah.
So again, this theme of light and darkness being worked in, that it is so cleverly done, that they constantly keep bringing things back to light and darkness,
Yeah.
false light and true light. These themes are being worked in. The pride, arrogance, and these sort of negative aspects are constantly being touched on, and prideful ambition being touched on as the keystones of downfall for people.
Yeah.
Whereas wanting to do something for someone else is rarely being framed in any way other than positive.
Right, right. Well, and
And
we don't know which Durin is going to be the famous Durin of Durin's Bane, but I'm guessing the father, Durin the Third. If that's if I got that right. In which case, the impact on the son is going to be really tremendous. It would be interesting to see what they do with that because obviously, I'm assuming that he would have some role in that happening against his father's wishes. Apparently, at this stage, anyway. Um, Maybe he kills both of them. I don't know. It would be Durin's as his bane in that case, but
um, and what is interesting is we have Elrond is going back to the Elvish lands. We have Galadriel and Halbrand going back to the Elvish lands. So
yeah,
this continuing collapsing of the narrative threads into each other to create cohesion.
right,
This is continuing. That we're getting all of these things are moving to these points that the different characters are now interweaving and
yeah,
meeting each other. The narratives are starting to interlink and interweave. Whereas
right,
at the beginning they were quite disparate, but we see that you start with the different threads, and as the season has progressed, these threads have started to intertwine
they drifted
into
toward each other. Yeah,
a single narrative thrust. That yes, we still are following distinct threads, but now we're seeing overlaps, we're seeing intersections.
yeah,
And this is very, very typical of an episode based television series, that yeah, you have a different major focus for each episode, but you slowly start bringing the plots together, these
right.
different narrative threads together. So I actually think a lot of this, no, it may not be paced to the liking of some people, but they have been building towards things,
Oh, clearly.
and in a very recognizable, very identifiable, and very common structure.
Yeah, and as we mentioned last time, the further we get in the season, the more evident it is that they actually had planned certain themes and the repetition of things. They've done a lot of foreshadowing, and they've done a lot of really, I think, good stuff in that regard. A lot of really clever storytelling in that regard, and even the Harfoots, of course. When I think it's Poppy who says, "Oh, they've already started cooking," and they come up and they see, "Oh my God, there's this damage. These are projectiles from Mount Doom, which had spewed out all over the place and caused the damage to the orchard where they were planning on getting their sustenance." So they're getting closer and closer to these events as well. So yeah,
And one last thing about Khazad-dûm. When we recall what um, Galadriel had been told at the beginning about the idea of the false light,
yeah,
Mithril is not true light. It
mm,
has an inner light, but it is leading them to delve down into darkness. Literally the thing that they were warned about, that
yeah,
we have been warned about, that this is not true starlight. It is reflective of it.
mm-hmm,
And so this is a reflection that is going to lead them down into darkness. And at the bottom of that darkness is a Balrog. And of course, in the initial sort of metaphor that we were given, this is about a stone falling. This is why a stone sinks. This is
mm,
about the fall. And of course, this is literally a sea of stone. And it's about the fall of Khazad-dûm into Moria.
wow, yeah, good
And
stuff. Yeah,
when when people say that the show doesn't have good writing, yeah, there are elements in it that have been weaker than other elements. There are, like,
yeah,
even we've discussed today, things that I didn't like or things that didn't work for me.
yeah,
But the show is not a trash fire. Like, some
yeah,
of this writing is actually incredible. It is very, very good.
right.
But, not all of it is going to work for me, and not all of it, I think, encapsulates what the writers, the team wanted to
Mm,
try and convey. I think they've fallen short in a number of respects. But by no means is this a badly written show. There are really strong elements of writing in it.
I agree. Yeah.
And I've greatly appreciated them. Some of the dialogue has been fantastic. Some of the acting has been fantastic. Some of the characters have been brilliant to see and hugely entertaining. And then
Mhm.
there are other moments where I go, oh.
I could never picture you doing that, AP. So
But me rolling my eyes and being critical.
I guess you have to live up to the name, a critical dragon, sometimes, right? So
But I I genuinely enjoyed this episode, and because a lot of it were these character moments, it was a lot of talking, it was a lot of character development. This is the bread and butter and meat of what I genuinely enjoy in narrative. I know action is necessary. I know action is entertaining. But for me, so much is about these character moments that deliver emotion and resonance. And that is what I love. And this episode just gave me so much more of that and was bringing all these elements together and calling back to previous moments and giving echoes and new ways of spinning what had happened before. So
hmm.
I really enjoyed this episode.
Well, I've enjoyed your mostly positive interpretation of the episode as well, and I'm sure that many of our viewers will feel the same. And that's great. That's why we have these conversations to learn from each other. So I appreciate that from you, my friend.
Whereas you had a problem with the Halbrand. I'm only mostly dead.
Yeah,
Oh, it's
yeah,
just a flesh wound. I'll be
right.
fine.
I think I'll take a walk.
Well, hang on a sec. In House of the Dragon, one of the characters gets shot through the shoulder with an arrow, gets shot in the leg with an arrow,
Yeah,
and then basically brushes it off, runs through a battle, like runs on a leg that has been
after
shot
being
through with
shot.
an arrow,
Okay.
wielding a sword two-handed, even though he's been shot in the shoulder by an arrow, and kills a bunch of people and then kills the bad guy. And you're like, yeah, that's fine because it's an action sequence. He's only mostly wounded. You go, we make alliances because of suspension of disbelief. And Halbrand, yeah, he walks and he's a bit unsteady. When he gets on his horse, he sways getting on, like he looks unsteady getting on. But to ask a rider to, right, we want you to pretend to not be a good rider when you're riding a horse off at speed.
Mm,
Sometimes you have to do it the right way to keep yourself safe. And yeah, it damages an element of your immersion to see that.
yeah. I
But
mean, you don't usually go galloping on a horse with a gut wound. Yeah.
at the same time, it is such a minor thing that I go, yeah, like they sold all of the elements up to that point. I'll just pretend that, yeah, he's after 2 minutes going, actually, Galadriel, we're going a wee bit faster. Any chance we can slow down to a walk? I'll add in that little scene to fix that issue. And
Yeah.
minor things like that, I get why they are grating, but at
Yeah.
the end of the day, when so much of it has been entertaining, when so much of it has been
Absolutely.
making me enjoy it,
Yeah.
that you go, there's so much bits and pieces I don't like.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. And it has been a fun storytelling experience for me. And especially I think from the beginning that we've been viewing this as very mythological storytelling. And that has really opened up the show in ways to me. It's helped me to appreciate the show as that type of storytelling, which I enjoy in many contexts, including the Silmarillion. Which Tolkien wrote very much as mythology. Not it's a different type of storytelling, as you pointed out in your video from today. It's a different type of storytelling than what you have in Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. It is much more likely to indulge in archetypes, and it's something that you don't necessarily, to get the most out of it, you don't necessarily take literally, right? So
Yeah, because even when we're dealing with fantasy, you have things that are portrayed in a realist mode, shall we say, for
mhm,
common understanding.
right.
And If you take some, it's an example I've used before about Stardust by Neil Gaiman. In the book Stardust, a character stumbles upon a scene where the lion and the unicorn are locked in battle to the death, and one of them dies. And
Right.
then the next day they'll have the battle again. And you go, that makes sense in a folkloric or mythic story
Mm,
because it's not realist. But if you try to show that in a story in a realist mode, you go, well, how does it come back to life? What's the process?
mm.
In Highlander, the movie,
Well,
they have, oh well, you can only be killed if your head's cut off. It's like, what counts as your head being cut off? Like if I blow you up and your shoulders are separated from the rest of your torso, does that count as your head being cut off? As soon as you start scratching at the elements to try and make it as if it is real in this world and adhere to our laws and our
mm,
reality, you are disabusing the notion of fantasy. Fantasy
right.
works because of a willing suspension of disbelief.
Right.
And that doesn't excuse like clear continuity errors. That can be really annoying. It doesn't excuse where things don't quite line up. Um, but at the same time, we have to take some of that criticism with a grain of salt because it isn't in a realist mode. In an action movie, how many times have we seen in an action movie a character get shot multiple times and then carry on in a fight, or a character who gets knocked unconscious, suffers a concussion, and 30 seconds later is, oh, I'm a bit dazed. All right, now I'm back in the fight. Did, or even in there was a TV show, which is actually it's an excellent TV show called Yellowstone,
Mm.
which is set on a ranch, and a guy suffers like a really horrendous spinal injury, and then because the other cowboys like, and he's in a full torso brace
Mm.
from his chin all the way down to his waist to keep his spine in alignment. And one of the other cowboys like, take that stuff off, and he takes it off, and within a couple of days is riding around on a horse. And you go,
Okay.
right, if anyone has a problem with realism, this is a show that is not only set in our world,
Right.
but we have been told explicitly that this guy should never ride again because he will end up paralyzed from the neck down. And yeah, well, after a couple of weeks healing, now he's fine.
Rips it off. Yeah. Yeah.
It's there. First of all, fantasy is different to realism. Secondly, mythic is different to that realistic mode. And thirdly, it is entertainment, not reality. And so all of these things are asking us to willingly suspend our disbelief about certain things. If you're not willing to do that, you will find things and go, but this doesn't make sense. You go, yeah, it's a story, not reality. We have to be willing to overlook at least some of it. And that doesn't mean that we can't note it. It doesn't mean that they get carte blanche to just put whatever on the screen for no reason. But there has to be a nuanced discussion, a balanced discussion of it, because this is entertainment. It's not real. It is not a documentary.
Right.
And there is a difference between story that is meant to be entertaining and watching a documentary.
Right. Right. So when you're blowing people's heads off their bodies, are you using fireballs for that? Sorry. All right. Well, that was.
I use the power of my mind.
Oh, okay. Well, that's considerable as well. So we'll leave it at that. But thank you, AP, for this discussion. I enjoyed it very much, and I'm sure that the viewers had a great time too. And I'll look forward to their comments. And everyone, till next time.